So we are live. I'm here with TJ. TJ, how you doing?
Good. Thank you, David.
Thanks for taking the time, and thanks for we've been doing a bit of email back and forth. You seem like a really respectful, dignified, faithful man, and I get a lot of loving energy from you in the emails. So and from your seeing your face now, I see you're a real nice man. So thanks for watching my channel and reaching out to me. And today we're going to talk a little bit about your perspective on the church. And I know you were interested in my critique I did of Lefebvre, and we're going to talk about that and the Society of Pius X and all that good stuff. So you know where I stand. I'm open, but I'm also closed to a certain degree because I value the living magisterium, and the indefectibility of the church has to be intact always until the end of time. And there are the four marks of the church, the three attributes of the church. Those are deal breakers for me. So we've done a little bit of back and forth on email. You know where I'm at. I pretty much have an idea where you're at, and you're a truth seeker, and so you're going to share with me and with my small audience what you're passionate about in terms of the faith and the abuses in the liturgy and the crises, plural, in the church that we've seen over the past decades, and I would say centuries, right back to the beginning. So why don't you just talk a little bit about yourself, first of all, like your faith journey, really quickly, an overview. How were you raised? How did you come to the Catholic faith? And how did you end up interested in more traditionalist sort of branches of Catholicism? Just give us an overview of who you are and how you came to be who you are today.
Sure. So again, thank you for having me on your show here. I'm from Michigan, so raised in Michigan. I was raised, as a Catholic. There was, I would say, for the most part, we were, Novus Ordo Catholics, growing up, and there was a window period of time where I was going to a traditional Latin Mass. I was probably about in the 6th grade, as I recall. So it was there that I received some great catechetical instruction. I was much more interested in playing sports than having to go 45 minutes to a traditional Latin Mass in order to get what turned out to be excellent catechetical instruction, and then receive my first Holy Communion there. As time went on, I can say that our family, we didn't we kind of went back to the mainstream Novus Ordo Church. And, I would say by and large, growing up, it was something that was done more out of some sort of uncertain sense of duty. We know that there's a church law that we're supposed to attend Mass, but it was kind of like going through the motions for the most part. My mother was very much traditionally oriented, and so she had a lot of difficulties with changes that she saw in the church. And I would notice things like, during the time of the kiss of peace, my mom would tend not to shake hands, and sometimes I would get actually upset with her and think, why are you doing this? Thinking like, you feel like you're better than everybody else, or whatever the case may be. I kind of went out of my way to try to, go shake a bunch of people's hands at times. So I kind of, I just growing up, I can say that we weren't necessarily part of a parish that we felt, at least I didn't feel like we were, it was like a family type of a parish community. I would later discover that when I came to traditional circles. In college, so I'm going to jump ahead a bit here. In college, I was actually searching really for where the true church was. I mean, I was involved in non-denominational Bible studies. I don't know if you've heard of Christian InterVarsity, but that's a very famous one. Okay, so Christian InterVarsity, it's a big one you'll find on a lot of secular campuses. They have an outreach where you can get involved, and I definitely got involved in that particular group. Met some wonderful people. To this day, I still remember a gentleman named Joel, who for example, would do things like go find. He came across a boy who had been terribly abused, and and just all kinds of ways. But I remember him saying, you know, I don't pretend to know what you've been through, but I want you to know that, you know, I'll be a brother to you. People like that, you know, when you come across those type of people, they make a pretty huge impact on you. And again, this is in the context of something that's considered non-denominational. So anyway, time goes on. That particular summer, my freshman year, comes to an end in college, and I go to it's a Bible, it's like a camp, you know, like a Bible camp, again, hosted by this same Christian InterVarsity. While I was there, I was in one of these prayer and worship sessions, and I was called out because I came to learn that my brother, who at that time was 10 years old, had been diagnosed with cancer. So, you know, that was just, I guess, to try to put it in a nutshell, that really kind of rocked my world, changed my world in a very big way. You know, I guess what that started me on was a deeper search for, you know, if I was already kind of looking for where Christ's true church was, now it was becoming more, let's say, urgent. And I remember when I went home after that trip, because this is right at the end of college. It's you know, early May or whatever. I met my aunt, my dear Aunt Maria, who kindly invited me to go to a mass. She invited me to go to a mass because I was asking questions that she said, you know, Protestants are wont to ask, and that was basically questions like, why do we pray to Mary? During the course of that year, I had been challenged on that same question, and I really didn't have an answer. You know, a lot of times, like I remember one time trying to answer that question, and all I did was just started kind of reciting the Hail Mary, because I was trying to think through how to answer the question. You know what I mean? So anyway, my aunt kind of just called me out on that and said, you know, that's a question that a lot of times Protestants will ask. I can tell that you've been around a lot of Protestants. And then she kind of, I don't know, in some ways it made me feel, I don't know, a little bit demeaned, but at the same time, she had a good intention at heart, and she wanted me to come, you know, back to the faith. And so we went to an outdoor mass. It was Taylor, Michigan. This would be 1997. And it was actually a Russian Orthodox priest that was offering the mass. Again, it was outdoor, under a tent. It had been a bit, you know, it was raining. It looked a bit foreboding. And at one point during the course of the mass, he actually spoke, and I believe this was sometime before the consecration. He was saying that no matter what happens here, no matter if there was somebody here that was to all of a sudden sprout a leg that didn't have a leg, he said the greatest miracle that takes place happens during the time of the consecration, when Jesus becomes present on our altars. And, you know, I guess for me, it was like to hear that in the context of my brother's, you know, having cancer. He wasn't with us. It was just my aunt and I that were at this mass in Taylor, Michigan. It was powerful. There's more to this particular story. And I don't share this often, but what ended up happening afterwards was something that I consider, an extraordinary kind of a grace that I certainly haven't had since. But there was a lady who was there. Again, this is during the course of, maybe it's communion time, or I don't know exactly when, but she starts to begin to talk about how Our Lady will be present here with us. She's going to appear, you know, to us, and I'm listening. What I can tell you that I saw was when you looked up in the sky, there came a point where people were all looking up because the sky was such that you could look at the sun and you could look at it steadfastly without having, any problem whatsoever. Yeah, it was like looking at a moon, like looking at the moon, you know. Mm. So clearly some of the clouds had dissipated. They've kind of gone their separate ways or whatever, but, it was still, it was such where you could look at the sun, and then it started to kind of flash in the sky, kind of flashing in place. Then it began to do like circles, but not exactly in place. I mean, kind of like still maybe within a certain radius, but circling, going around.
Wobbling.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was, yeah, something, gyrating, something.
Like Fatima.
And so thank you, because that's what I ended up learning about. Subsequently, I learned more about Fatima, and yeah, it's basically what is described as what took place at Fatima. If you were to call, and again, I did this actually a year or two ago, because I was thinking to myself, like, what I saw, I thought I was going to see on national, like world news or something. Like, to me, it was so evident that something extraordinary had happened. The sun doesn't do that. That I thought that this was going to be something that I was going to be able to go back and look on the news, and it was going to be reported and everything. It wasn't. One other thing of note, though, during the course of the time that I was there, and probably my aunt had talked with this Russian Orthodox priest, sometime beforehand, but during the course of while some of this was going on, the priest actually walked around to where we were, and then he said to me, he said, do you see how much your mother loves you? The Blessed Mother. Do you see how much she loves you? And I mean, all of these things coming together, the Eucharist, the Blessed Mother. I mean, the fact that it was the Blessed Mother who's being, to whom this is being attributed as her message to us, her sign to us, all kind of helped coalesce to make me realize that, yes, the true faith is the Catholic faith. Now, I had no real distinctions between what was Orthodox versus what was Catholic. To me, I was at a mass. Now, granted, this mass was celebrated in a very reverent way, and in a way that was quite solemn. Though it were just one priest, that was there. I shouldn't say solemn in the sense of lots of ministers. It was just, him offering the mass, but doing it in a way that was reverent. All of that had a profound impact. Anyway, I point this out because certainly that was a point at which, again, the trajectory of my life and my focus was now clearly, my conviction was clear that the true faith is this Catholic faith, the faith of Jesus Christ. And so I guess from there, I was able to kind of withstand. I was able to bear a lot of the hardships that would come in the next year and a half as my brother's condition worsened. He would end up losing his leg. His other leg had to be stiffened. It was locked in place because the cancer had spread to that one, and then the cancer also spread to his lungs. At the end of his life, towards the end, he was rushed to a hospital, and my father had received, I think, just some signal graces in this whole ordeal. But he would cry out to God. He at one point, because he couldn't breathe, and he said, "Almighty God, help me," in kind of a desperation. And this is before he was then transferred to another hospital. While he was at this other hospital, my father also shared with us that he, at one point, while my brother was in ICU, my dad was just outside, kind of, he said he was trying to contain him, trying to hold it together. And he heard my brother talking, and at first my dad thought he was talking to him. And he said, "Yeah, I know who you are. You're Mary." And so, I mean, there was some kind of a conversation. My dad, again, witnessed that little bit. My dad didn't see the Blessed Virgin Mary, but my brother must have been seeing her, and because he was certainly conversing and talking with her. Now, this is, again, I'm by this point, we've rolled into like another year. So this is towards the end of my brother's, year and a half battle with cancer from the time he was diagnosed. So now I'm kind of into my end of my, I guess it would be maybe mid to end of my sophomore year. It's my second year in a program at Western Michigan University. And at the near the very end, my brother did receive last rites from a traditional Catholic priest of the Society of St. Pius X. By this time, I had been going to a traditional mass on the invitation of my aunt, and this particular priest had come in and he offered the traditional rites to my little brother, and I, again, it was in Latin. I didn't know at that time. Certainly, I didn't know the words that were being spoken. I didn't hear my brother say this exactly, but I think my mother or someone in the room did. He said, "Father, your words are beautiful." Now, my brother was on a lot of morphine too. I don't know, like he's an 11-year-old, but he's perceiving something. And God is giving him something. All I know is what I felt in that moment was a profound peace, because up to that point, building up to this point, I can say that I was very worried about this and that and exams and like just things that are more like, preoccupations of my own little world. But, and then also obviously being concerned about him as he's getting closer to what looks like he could die. And in fact, he did die. My father, probably about a day and a half later, my father and I were my dad was kind of had an arm around Andrew and, just right next to him. And I was at a chair kind of on the other side of the bed, sleeping over there. And then my dad, I remember it was about 3:00 in the morning, November 3rd. And he said, TJ, he said, he's gone, and that was it. I remember praying the rosary on the way back home, but I remember being profoundly at peace, just profoundly at peace. At this point in my journey, I had been looking more and more for, let's say, conservative Catholicism. Again, that year before is what I had realized the true church is the Catholic Church. But I was also realizing too that certain in different venues where the mass was offered, let's say at your your college parish, it's going to look one way versus when you go downtown to the cathedral, where maybe you only have a handful of elderly people that are coming together, but it's much more, I found to be much more conservative. So it seemed to me as I was praying the rosary, as I was coming more and more into a knowledge of the faith, that I was just drawn to what was more traditional until the time, as I say, my aunt had invited me to a traditional Latin mass, where yes, the Society of St. Pius X was servicing just a rinky-dink little chapel in Grand Rapids. But what I noticed there was the reverence for the Blessed Sacrament, and also the modesty of the young ladies. That was another thing that struck me. Beautiful young ladies, just modestly attired. Those two things at that time in my life were very powerful. And by the way, the same catechism teacher that I had, when I was in 6th grade or whatever, she was still there. Like by this time they had acquired a little church, but this is the same catechism teacher. And I'll tell you what, she was just no bones. I mean, she just told you the faith and she taught it, and actually was very instrumental in helping me to develop a devotion to the Blessed Mother, according to the, that which is outlined by St. Louis de Montfort.
Yeah. Amazing.
So yeah, that's
so you named your son after your brother. Is that correct?
That's right. Yes, I did. Yes, I did. Yep.
Nice.
Yeah.
Wow. Do you have any other siblings?
I have a sister.
How's she doing?
I have a sister. She seems well. She has a one child also. I should
How's her
probably give
faith?
her
How's her
a
faith?
call.
How's her faith?
Well, I mean, so here's the thing, and this is part of what I feel like David is really at the heart of a lot of this is like, you know, in our family, especially with what happened in our own
Yeah.
situation with my brother Andrew, like, you know, in those moments you have to make a decision to draw closer to God upon the invitation, the graces that He's giving in that moment. Or sometimes that doesn't happen where you don't draw closer. And I think these sorts of crises can be the occasion when one chooses an alternate route, you know, and obviously there's only one other, you know, there's a kind of only one other way. So without judging necessarily like, you know, her state of soul and that kind of thing, she's clearly not like on the same path, let's say, of having come closer to the faith. We've had some good discussions in the past. But you know, right now it's a prayer intention. So I would, since you ask, I ask for your prayers for my dear sister.
Yes.
Her name is Gina. So
for Gina, yes, and for your whole family. And I do have that perpetual mass being said for you every day until the end of time, and that covers you, your kids, your parents, your siblings. So it's a nice way to be inundated with graces for conversion, and of course we all need ongoing conversion every day, every moment of every day to get closer to God. But yeah, I sympathize with you. I'm the only one in my family who's Catholic. I converted in 2009, and but I always think about Christ, how He said the first shall be last and the last shall be first, and there's the 11th hour worker that gets the same wage and all these sorts of things. Like God works in mysterious ways, and He's not worried about what looks to us like a really scary journey. Like he's in control, and everyone who's supposed to end up in heaven ends up in heaven. And sadly, those who ultimately will say no, God already knows which ones are ultimately going to say no and end up in hell. I hope it's a fringe minority, but all of the saints seem to indicate that it's a majority of people that go to hell. I don't know. I just hope and pray for the best, and I know God wants every man to be saved. So
yes, yeah.
Scary.
Yeah, and in light of that too, you know, there is this notion too of us being a mystical body and how we can obviously help one another with our prayers and sacrifices. And you know, when you think of, yes, like it's a kind of it's a daunting kind of a consideration, but it is salutary also that, you know, Our Lady, to kind of piggyback off what you were saying, I mean, she did say that many souls go to hell because there's no one to pray and sacrifice for them. You know, and so you just come to realize, like, yes, Christ is, you know, the absolute mediator, right? He's the one that principally is the source of all grace, but at the same time, we as mystical members are somehow mysteriously like involved in a distribution thereof, you know, in a very practical and concrete way. You know, to whom much is given, much is required.
Yeah, it's a heavy responsibility, but I guess it's that instrumentality of God, and you see that most clearly in the great saints, how they are instruments of God, and they know their own unworthiness, and they know their sinfulness, and they allow them. The difference between them and us, well, not, you know, present company excluded, I don't know, you might be a great saint, but the difference between the great saints and me is they say yes, they love God more than they love themselves, and they love God's will more than they love their own will, and then they become instruments of God. That's the only difference, and you and I can do that. It takes another level of faith. Like you and I have faith. I think your faith is probably stronger than mine, but if we were able to, there's nothing stopping us right now from manifesting the greatness of the greatest saints. It just takes a leap of faith. It takes courage, and of course it takes a lot of grace and a lot of commitment to grace, to cooperate fully with the grace no matter what. And it is a point of shame for me that I'm not converting everyone I come into physical contact with or proximity with the way the great saints, you know, often did. But even the great saints, they were surrounded by people who did not convert, right? Mm-hmm. So it's very mysterious. Yeah. It's very mysterious. But then again, hundreds of years later, a sinner like myself can pick up a book by one of these great saints, like Saint Louis de Montfort, and we can be converted. So it's very, very mysterious, the economy of salvation, and we're going to be celebrating for all eternity the justice, the mercy, the goodness of God, and how He gave us this opportunity to know Him and to love Him and to serve Him. And so, yeah, it's all very exciting. But again, like you emphasized, the necessity to pray. I'm reading Saint Alphonsus Liguori, one of my favorite saints. I've got his complete works. It's going to take me 300 hours to read it. But he repeats himself a lot, and one of the things he emphasizes is if you pray, you'll certainly be saved, and if you don't pray, you'll certainly be damned. And not only you, but like you were saying, Our Lady said that many souls are lost because others aren't there for them. They're not praying for them. So we need to pray without ceasing. So do you want to dive right in? Thank you for the introduction. Do you want to dive right in now to some of your concerns with liturgical abuse and other abuses and the crises? And I don't know which rabbit hole you want to go down, or if you want to just talk about tradition generally, or talk about Archbishop Lefebvre, or where you want to start. It's entirely up to you. I know you have a little presentation here, and we will I will have you back so that we can dig deeper. But today's just sort of getting our feet wet.
Okay. Yeah, sure. And again, thank you for allowing me to be able to kind of share this with you. It's true that you can go down lots of different rabbit holes. There's so many aspects that I feel like, that are part and parcel of the crisis in the church. Trying to distill where the biggest errors are is a great work of, I guess, an ongoing work that I think, as the society, the St. Pius X, is trying to do in terms of just keeping with tradition. They consider themselves a band of rebuilders to try to maintain the traditions of the church in a world that looks like is going further and further away, in a church that seems to also, in many regards, in regards to the human element, is kind of taking that same sort of path, unfortunately. So the society is providentially there to kind of, again, not to say that they are the church, but to try to hold to what the church has always done, and then to be able to supply eventually the church with good and holy priests according to the age-old traditions. Now I'm going to start off, if you don't mind. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here because I want to read a little bit of a declaration, which we'll get into. And this is Archbishop Lefebvre. He started his society in 1970, again, because there were a lot of, there were a number of seminarians that had come to him concerned about getting a true priestly formation. They were going to various seminaries and finding that there was heterodox, and this is being kind of generous here, but heterodox sorts of views that were being pushed on them. And they knew the Archbishop, who was basically in a position of retirement. So he had come after an illustrious career in Africa. I mean, being just to look at some of the things that he had done there was amazing in terms of what God was able to do, say, through him in Africa. But now, after this career, and in Africa, and now he's retired, there are young men that are coming to him asking for help to be trained in the proper way to become priests. Anyway, so I'll kind of jump into some of the concerns. This is to back up just a little bit here, but there's obviously the new mass has come out.
Can I interrupt for 1 second? Can you?
Yes.
On the left of your PowerPoint, is that PowerPoint? There's a if you hover over the barrier between the two zones on the far left, you can drag everything over to the right. So hover over the bar. You see the go a little bit to the right. Go to the right. The other way.
Right. Yeah.
The barrier. Yeah. Oh, you had it. The barrier in between. Hover. Move around. No. Move around until you see the arrow going left and right. So just go on the line beside. Yeah. Now drag it to the right, please, to make it smaller. Yeah, exactly. Okay,
Is that
keep
good?
going. Right there. Okay, that's good. Because on my screen and what the people are seeing at home, they weren't able to see the text on the left-hand side, so now they can see it, okay? Sorry
Okay.
for that
Okay.
administrative intrusion, but
That's
you
okay.
can continue
That's
from here.
okay.
So now people can see all of the text.
Okay. Okay. Um, and are you seeing over here by chance, David? Is this what you're seeing over here, or
Huh?
or are you seeing over?
I can see that. I can see just a part of that. I can't see all of that, but that's less important. I'll just focus on the main screen that you have open right here, like the promulgation of the Novus Ordo Institutio
I see. I
Generalis.
see.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep. 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 So yeah, in the institution of the new mass, the aspect of supper supersedes sacrifices. I have written there. So the notion of the sacrifice, as it was, traditionally understood, Session 22 of the Council of Trent, is very different from what the Novus Ordo tends to emphasize. So this picture here is a picture of Archbishop Annibale Bunini, who was regarded as the chief architect of the Novus Ordo. He was in charge of a commission called the Concilium, and they were responsible for implementing changes, which I believe were in some way, shape or form from Vatican II documents inspired by the Constitution Sacrosanctum Concilium. So basically, there's an iron law which states that the law of praying influences our law of believing. Lex orandi, lex credendi is kind of how it's said in Latin. And so this idea that you got such a radical change in terms of orientation. Again, supper and sacrifice is a very different, and even just the way people are oriented at Mass, priest facing the people versus everyone together facing in the liturgical East. That's the traditional Latin Mass, obviously. That's not to say that you can't get that kind of ad orientem orientation in the Novus Ordo, but it's fewer and far between. And it actually does tell you something a little bit about what the those who created and who are behind these changes wanted to I guess you say the ambiance that they wanted to establish, which is a very different again orientation from what the church had traditionally been accustomed to. So what in 69 also, so this is still a little bit of backup before the society had started, but one thing that did happen after the promulgation of the Novus Ordo Mass was, and again, the promulgation doesn't happen until 1970. So the Institutio Generalis, okay, that's really just kind of the foreword to what is going to be the blueprint for what's going to be a Protestantized Mass. Now that might seem a little bit harsh, but the fact that you did have Protestant observers who, although they didn't have an official capacity in terms of voting and that sort of thing, Michael Davies actually talks about this. He writes very extensively on the liturgical changes, and he did reach out to one of them and asked what sort of a interaction did you have, what sort of an influence did you have, and behind the scenes their influence was very much it was something that they took into account, to the point where Archbishop Annibale Bunini would state that the new Mass should be something that would have no shadow of a stumbling block for our separated brethren. So the new Mass is as Cardinal Ottaviani would state, it's reduced to the supper, as we talked about, and it characterizes the supper as an assembly presided over by a priest and as a memorial of the Lord to recall what he did on Holy Thursday. So that's what Pope Paul VI had given his signature to. Now, it's true that this particular Institutio Generalis will have to be corrected, and it's largely on account of something like the Ottavi, intervention, or those who would raise their voices against the fact of how this is defined is very, very different from the way the Council of Trent would define the Mass. And so what Ottaviani would state was that none of this implies the real presence, the reality of the sacrifice, The sacramental function of the priest who consecrates. You have this kind of idea of the priesthood of the faithful being kind of mixed with the priest. The priest is almost, he's the leader of the assembly. This is the kind of notion that comes out of the, with the advent of the new mass. And then also the intrinsic value of the Eucharistic sacrifice independent of the assembly. So these are some of the things that he cites as being problematic. And again, this is the formation that's going to be the bread and butter for seminarians in the wake of the Second Vatican Council.
Yeah, can I just interrupt?
Yes.
I want to emphasize with you and my listeners, I think they already know this, that if you read the documents of Vatican II, it's very clear that they are emphasizing all those points that you think are neglected by the Novus Ordo Mass. And it may be the case that the impression that's given, the emphasis that's given, and the obviously not to mention the abuses that have just been rampant, they are helping Satan to win souls for hell. But if you love the faith, if you love Christ and his church, you will find out what the church teaches, and you will not want to denigrate the sanctity of the Mass or downplay the element, the idea of the sacrifice, which is very strongly emphasized in the documents of Vatican II, which I think you've read. Have you read all 16 documents?
So I can say I have not read all 16 documents. So that's definitely something where I should do my due diligence in that regard. What I do know, though, is but keep going, David.
I was done. I'm just saying that I'm well aware, and I'm very sympathetic to you. But I've also read the documents, and I interpret everything with the hermeneutic of continuity. And I read the documents of Trent. I read the documents of Vatican I. I read the documents of Vatican II. So I think that Catholics who are on fire for the faith have to be educated. It's a necessity, right? We need to read we need to be familiar with the scriptures, read the scriptures regularly, pray without ceasing, all these sorts of things. One thing I will ask before we go on is that famous question I asked you by email or in the comments. I don't remember now. But who needs the SSPX when we have the Fraternity of St. Peter, the Priestly Fraternity of St. Peter, the Fssp? What's your short answer to that?
Oh, it's not a short answer, but can I quickly interject, David, in regards to the Second Vatican Council?
Yeah.
I wanted to affirm something that you said, and that was that, yes, you find these traditional statements that are absolutely in there, and some of the most beautiful, like, say, statements in regards to aspects of the church and things that, you can find beautiful statements in Lumen Gentium 25, for example. The problem is that there are also things that you can have something that's stated beautifully, but then you have other things that are inserted there that are part of the documents, which undermine what may have just been said a paragraph or two beforehand. And so these are considered to be like time bombs, where liberal periti, and these periti would be those experts that were at the council. There was constellations of them around the bishops that were there. These were the experts who were theologians advising the bishops. But many of them, for example, Sspx, Congar, some of these I guess more infamous names, who were theologians and progressive theologians, they knew, and they this is on record, we knew what we would do with those phrases after the council.
Yep.
So we have to understand that even though there are beautiful statements that are put in there in regards to matters of faith, you'll find something about sacrifice, you'll find this and that. Nonetheless, there are revolutionary principles which are embedded in the documents themselves, which perhaps you and I could look at and we could say, I can interpret that in a very Catholic way. Yep. But then you take Chenu, you take Sspx, you take Congar, you take name your progressive theologian, and what'll end up happening is those time bombs become a way in which revolution is enacted in the church. Yeah. Now, liturgically, the mechanism is most effective because this is where most people are going. Most people aren't reading the documents of Vatican II like you have done. Yeah. Most people are going to Mass on Sunday. They're trying to fulfill their Sunday obligation. If if they stay in the church.
Yeah.
But as we know, Pope John Paul II, laments in 2003 in his document Ecclesia et Europa, where we're experiencing a silent apostasy. And I mean, it's a hemorrhaging of people that have left the church.
Yeah.
I've got a little book here. I mean, it's just a little reference guide. It's called Index of Catholic Indicators.
Hold
Index
it
of
in
Catholic
front of your face, because it disappears otherwise. Okay. It flashed on. It flashed on and off. It disappears, but we got a flash of it.
Okay. Index of leading Catholic indicators, the church since Vatican II. And the man just goes through here, but you don't need a book like this. You can go onto your latest Pew Research polls, and I can cite for you all kinds of information. I mean, you can do it yourself, right?
Yeah.
What's the latest, like the Eucharist, right? So 2/3, and this is being slightly generous, but I mean, nearly 70% of people who go to Mass don't believe that Jesus Christ is truly body, blood, soul, and divinity present in the Blessed Sacrament. If you would have asked me that before, circa 1997, I probably wouldn't have had a ready answer for you. I wouldn't have known what to tell you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Scary.
So, I mean, okay, but that's all. But as far as your question in regards to why have the, why do we need the SSPX if we don't, if we have the Fraternity of St.
Okay,
Peter?
first of all, was the FSSP born out of the SSPX? Is that what happened?
Yeah, because listen, so right now we're in 1975. There's no one else to turn to. I mean, you might have some independent priests here and there, but the only organized society institute that's offering the traditional Latin Mass and trying to train priests is the Society of St. Pius X. Okay. I stand to be corrected on that, but certainly the Fraternity of St. Peter does not come into existence until after Archbishop Lefebvre consecrates the 4 bishops, right?
Yeah.
That day, June 30th, 1988. In what he recognized, and what I believe too, was Operation Survival for Tradition. I mean, that's what's happening. And I mean, the whole purpose of the presentation is to try to build up to the point where, you may not agree with me completely on, or maybe hardly on much of this, but I can tell you that this is the optic that it seems to make the most sense to me. And what we're doing, obviously, too, is this is Fides Querens Intellectum. This is faith seeking understanding. I'm trying to make sense of a crisis that has taken place in the archbishops. What the society stands for, what they've done is they've stood in the, kind of in the brink, and they've been the ones that have recognized the gravity of the crisis, and they've given a proportionate response. And it has to come through seminaries. It has to come through holy priests. It has to come through a training which is going to ensure that faithful get sacraments that are not, questionable.
Yeah. So
that's yeah. Go ahead.
I just read Wikipedia. If you trust Wikipedia, they said in 1988, 12 SSPX priests formed the FSSP because they weren't happy with the you might know something about this, the Econ consecration. So that must be consecrations that took place at a place called Econ, maybe in Switzerland.
Econ, Switzerland. Here's a picture of it right here. Can you see this right here?
Ah, okay.
There's Econ.
Yeah. Okay, it's a famous place for you.
Oh, it's a very famous place. Definitely.
Okay,
mm-hmm.
First time
in the world of tradition.
Okay. So it seems to me that everyone should have just flooded into the FSSP and left the SSPX behind, because it gives unity with the living magisterium. That's how it seems to me, with a naive lack of education about everything in traditional Catholicism. But that's just my sort of rough take as an ignorant outsider. Everyone should have just flooded in. Like, we have a way back to the living magisterium. Let's all go. But that didn't happen.
That didn't happen. And I guess here's the other thing too, is there are issues at stake here too, which are part and parcel that are connected to Vatican II. I was talking about revolutionary principles, but what I said what is gratuitously affirmed can be gratuitously denied. You haven't asked me for any, like, okay, what are these revolutionary principles? I imagine you're going to, because I know you're
Sure.
very, intent and keen upon making sure that you understand.
Yeah.
So as far as this whole, the society, what they have been trying to do is to try to hold to the traditional faith, traditional sacraments, and to be able to offer that for the salvation of souls, really. And they don't necessarily impose themselves. They go where people are asking and basically crying out for help. Now, what I guess what has to happen is people have to come to a recognition that there is a crisis in the church, and that crisis is coming from, let's say, as it did in the time of the Arian heresy, it's coming from the human element in hierarchical positions who are not guiding the bark of Peter. They're not guiding the church in the right way. Again, you were talking about indefectibility earlier, and the Society of St. Pius X, myself, and I'm no spokesman for the society, but I can say that they would say amen absolutely to the fact that there is, the church is indefectible. The gates of hell will not prevail against her. But right now, the gates of hell are sure doing, their damnness to be able to try to do something, that's going to rock the boat in such a way as to try to sink it. They're not going to. But that's all to say that, the society has a history, and this is part and parcel of kind of what I was trying to get back in regards to 75. My question to people, and I've even done this where I've called in Catholic Answers and I've asked, why was the Society of St. Pius X, why were they suppressed out of canonical existence? They had a normal, regularly canonically approved seminary, and it was doing good work for the church. So 1970 is when it started. 71, they get a letter of praise from Cardinal Wright from the Vatican. So things are going well. But there are those bishops in France in particular who are seeing the good fruits and the fact that you have a seminary now which is gaining seminarians while all of their seminaries are being emptied. We got to ask ourselves a question: why are the modern seminaries emptying? So that's at least a question I'm going to throw out there. But what they see is, okay, at Icone, where they're offering the traditional Latin Mass, they have vocations, lots of vocations. And as the years are going on, they're getting more and more. In 1972, they hold a meeting in Lourdes where through some kind of, let's say, a collegial meeting, because oftentimes, of course, you have your, you've got your, like the USCCB here, right? They've got something like that in France. So they've got their, they come together for these meetings. But one of the things that they stated was that they would not accept priests to be incardinated into any of the dioceses in France that come from this particular seminary. Well, why? And so, but the point here is that there are bishops that are upset about this particular seminary being allowed to exist. So what they end up doing is it seems, are able to get the ear of someone in the Vatican, namely is the Secretary of State, who's Cardinal Villot. Cardinal Villot is very instrumental in getting the society to be put out of canonical existence. But let me just share with you a little bit about how that happened. So there's an Apostolic Visitation, which takes place in 1964. So there's two people that come, Cardinal Descamps and Onklin, Monsignor Onklin, and they visit the seminary at Icone. While the course of their time that they're there, they don't attend any of the masses. They express doubts concerning the traditional concept of Christ's resurrection, a denial of immutable truth. And then they, express their ideas that there's going to be a married clergy at some point, and that's just inevitable. So the Archbishop is hearing these apostolic visitors talk about that. Now, he goes on to write a declaration, okay? And this declaration would be the only grounds that would be used to close down the seminary and to close down and put the Society of St. Pius X out of canonical existence. He begins by saying, "We hold firmly with all our heart, with all our mind, to Catholic Rome, guardian of the Catholic faith and of the traditions necessary to the maintenance of this faith, to eternal Rome, mistress of wisdom and truth. We refuse, on the other hand, and have always refused, to follow the Rome of neo-modernist and neo-Protestant tendencies, which became clearly manifest during the Second Vatican Council and after the Council in all the reforms which issued from it." This particular declaration goes on, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but basically it's taking one declaration that he writes, and I'll just say that when you read the declaration, I read the declaration, it's one of these kinds of documents that's put out there that helps to make sense of so much in a few words, but it really does hit at the crisis that is afflicting the church. And he does say, yes, these neo-modernist and neo-Protestant tendencies, which were manifest during the Second Vatican Council, after the council, and all the reforms which issued from it. I mean, communion in the hand, for example. I mean, this sort of thing. This started out as an abuse. And then it was just permitted to the point where finally the Vatican said, okay, you can have communion in the hand. But this started out as an abuse.
Yeah.
And bishops were the ones that were perpetuating these abuses, especially in the Dutch countries, the Netherlands, that kind of area. They're infamous for another thing called the Dutch Catechism, which was, I mean, quasi-heretical.
Yeah.
So it's like, why are these things allowed to happen and nothing happens to these progressive bishops? And then in the meantime, all Archbishop Lefebvre is trying to do is, in the midst of this liturgical experimentation, he's asking to be able to hold the experiment of tradition. This is what he's asking for.
Yeah.
He, up to this point, he doesn't have to ask for it, but what ends up coming down the pike here is these particular. There's an ad hoc commission of cardinals that summon the Archbishop for a quote unquote discussion, but this is no discussion at all. So he goes 2 times. He goes March 13th. He goes February 13th and then March 3rd, 1975. He meets with them. And basically from start to finish, they're trying to basically tell him that he's, disobedient to the Pope. He's being,
rebellious.
Rebellious, right? Yeah. I mean, and everything is based off of this declaration.
Yeah.
And so based upon that declaration, this ad hoc commission of cardinals then tells the local ordinary, Bishop Memmi, so this is Bishop Memmi here, that that he has the power to withdraw all the acts and concessions granted by his predecessor in agreement with the Holy See. So I'll stop right there, because what ends up happening, the whole course of these 2 discussions, Archbishop Lefebvre finds out that he was actually on trial and that he's being condemned in a sense without really, no matter what he says, it was in vain that I tried to formulate arguments. Nothing was done to try to, accompany me in any way, shape, or form, or try to see my point of view. This discussion was actually more like a kangaroo court, you might say. And so he found himself condemned before really having had a hearing.
Yeah.
Kind of a formality.
I wonder if you can, because I'm going to have to leave here shortly. It's been approaching 1 hour, but I will have you back. I'm wondering if there's a nice way for you to wrap this up. And in the meantime, I will ask one question, sort of reiterating my basic point, which is that this is all very interesting. It's a little bit like a soap opera, and it's always messy. If you read the history of the councils, the history of the popes, it's always messy. It's always a soap opera. But none of it is protected by the Holy Spirit, except for the dogmas and those teachings and of course, the 4 marks and the 3 attributes. So it's all really interesting, but it's all really irrelevant to me because we have the FSSP. What don't you like about the FSSP when you compare it with the SSPX?
Okay. I guess I can try to just maybe get to some of the key issues here.
Yeah, but remember, you're going to come back, right?
Well, I'm sorry.
If it's to answer my question, great, but don't feel you need to rush any of your presentation because you will come back.
Okay. I guess as far as the Fraternity of St. Peter, I know of several Fraternity of St. Peter priests who are wonderful, exemplary. They do wonderful work. One of the key differences between the Society of St. Pius X and them is that the concern regarding the Second Vatican II, the Second Vatican II documents, the Council documents, in regards to things like ecumenism, collegiality, dialogue.
Okay, so basically, Vatican II, you personally reject Vatican II. So did Archbishop Lefebvre, and so do most people in the SSPX. They reject Vatican II. You reject Vatican II, and that's why you can't embrace fully the Fssp. Is that putting it in a nutshell? Does that fit?
So the errors of Vatican II, I would say, are to be distinguished from the things that are, as you pointed out, good in the documents.
Traditional
themselves.
Content, yeah, therein. But
yeah, traditional content.
What would prevent you? What would prevent you from adopting a hermeneutic of continuity, even though you know God is giving them enough rope to the modernists enough rope to hang themselves? You know that, but there are contradictions, apparent contradictions in the Bible.
Sure.
So God gives us all enough rope to hang ourselves with heresy and modernism and any other heresy. So that's not the issue. Like, there's stumbling stones in the Bible, and Jesus Christ himself is a stumbling stone. So that's a moot point. The stumbling stones are a moot point. And it is a scandal. It's a sin to cause scandal, but it's also sin to submit to scandal or to be scandalized by scandal. So we need to have faith in Christ and his church and use that hermeneutic of continuity. That's what I would say to you. I would say forget about the SSPX, come on board with the Living Magisterium, and embrace Vatican II, because it's a real council. It's an ecumenical council.
Okay, but those things which are not infallible, for example, like if I was to ask you in regards to the nature of the church, this is one among other things, right? But the Vatican II, as I understand it, David, was supposed to kind of help us to speak to the common person in such a way that it was clear, understandable, not make things more complicated, right?
Yeah.
So, when you say something like the Church of Christ subsists in the Catholic Church, is it not easier to say the Catholic Church is the Church of Christ?
No. Well, it's easier, but it's not as useful. It's not as useful. Subsist. I spent a lot of time, not a lot of time, but I spent a moderate amount of time examining the word choice of subsists in, and it has everything to do with the potential, those who have the potential to get the faith and to get into the state of grace, okay? Because those who ultimately are not going to hell are all going to heaven, and they all have at least the potential to have the faith and to get into the state of grace. But there are three categories. The first category, those who have the faith and are in the state of grace. The second category, they have the faith, but they're not in the state of grace. And in that category, we have these Catholics in name only who don't even believe in the real presence, right? And then in the third category of the members of Christ are those who merely have the potential to get the faith and get in the state of grace. So that's why we use the word subsists in, because there's this tendency for Christ to draw his sheep to himself, and ultimately they will recognize his voice, they will get into the ark, they will be saved. That's the exciting part about Vatican II. That's one of the most exciting things in the documents of Vatican II, is that word subsists in. It's what I'm very, very excited about that, and it's very, very Catholic. And there's no argument that can be made against it unless you want to twist it and pervert it. But I mean, no, it's a wholesome word choice. And I think the Holy Spirit was at work in Vatican II, and the ambiguities that were allowed by the Holy Spirit to enter into the wording, the phrasing, and of course all the modernists and liberals and Freemasons that were laughing, thinking that they'd, put one over on God, they're wrong. They're, the enemies of Christ, they don't have a happy outcome unless they repent. So, I mean, The analogy I like to make is with the Holy Scriptures, the Bible. There are plenty of opportunities to rebel, and there are plenty of opportunities if you want to find a stumbling stone, if you want to find contradiction, or at least apparent contradiction. The example I like to use is marriage. I mean, divorce. Moses said it was okay. Jesus said no, that was a concession. So there will always be opportunity to apply whatever hermeneutic you want to use, whatever lens, whatever filter you want to use. But the essential and most important thing is, if you love Christ, you love his church, and if you love his church, you'll obey the church, and you will not rebel against the church. So my concern for you and all those in the SSPX is that you're in a mode of rebellion. And I still feel that Archbishop Lefebvre was in rebellion against Christ and his church. And I want to give you a chance to come back and convince me otherwise. You give me lots of links to review, and I've reviewed a couple of them. But we're going to have a deeper discussion about this. But to wrap this up, because I do have to go now, I'm going to give you the floor. You can talk for 2 minutes, 5 minutes, as long as you want, just to sort of wrap up and get the final word, and to prepare us for when you come back in a week or two, whatever it is.
Okay. No, thank you. And I guess as far as the church subsisting in the Catholic Church versus, what was said before, the church taught in, you were asking me like, well, what's the problem with the Catholic Church subsist in the Church of Christ, or vice versa? I forget how it goes. You may be able to help me with that, but one is a broader extension than the other, it seems. And as far as then, being clear on what the Church of Christ is potentially versus what is in actual fact, what is an act. And it's true, God sees from all eternity. I understand that, and that potentially there's all kinds of things that could be possibly. But what we have to be able to understand is this is not how the church talked about her nature beforehand. And, one quick answer to your question is you have to try to reconcile that with Mystici Corporis by Pius XII, which says something very, very different. And you can go to the Catholic Encyclopedia on this, which speaks about this particular encyclical, and it does not make provision for the sorts of potentialities that subsistit in does. Subsistit in muddies the waters to the extent that you don't really, you talk about ecclesial communities, you talk about these different people that, yes, have certain aspects of things that belong to the one true Church of Jesus Christ. But the problem with that is then it opens up this whole, this is where it gets into the ecumenical dimension, which is really part and parcel of the thrust of the real, I would say probably the main error that we have coming out of Vatican II is this ecumenism, or this ecumenical dialogue, which, if for us, again, we could probably try to look at that and say, well, that's just evangelization, and we're just trying to bring people back to the Church of Christ. Well, the problem there is that, again, you go to Sspx, you go to some of these other modernist theologians, and they've got a very different idea about what that means. And so in practice, I'm talking about what's seen in practice. And again, by their fruits, you will know them, right? By their fruits, you will know them. And what has happened, what has been allowed to happen, it seems, in the church, is that this ecumenical dialogue, we saw Assisi, right? And the problem with Assisi is Archbishop Lefebvre looked at that and said, this is a grave scandal. And we can't diminish, the popular conception of what that photo op does for people when they look at that.
The Quran.
So this is it's a very different orientation. Okay.
Kissing the Quran, is that what you're talking about? Do you think?
Well, there's kissing the Quran. There's putting the statue of Buddha up on the altar. This is at Assisi, but then at Assisi also, you have. This panoply of religious leaders that are standing up on the same plane. Here's a picture right here. I've added this little picture at the top here, but basically you've got here at Assisi all these various different religious leaders who are coming together to pray to whom? This is the question of Archbishop. What God will they pray to?
Yeah.
Why are they so what's the purpose behind this? Pope John Paul II would say that the right key to the teaching of Vatican II, the church as a sacrament of unity of mankind, is kind of like this idea of the seeds of the word that lie hidden among all religions. Ad gentes is where that comes from. But basically he goes on to say, like, this here is a catechism clear to everybody about what the church means to do when it does ecumenism.
Yeah.
It's a object lesson. It is a catechism clear to all. And the thing is this is a very different catechism than what we had before the council. So I would leave it at that.
Yeah. Okay. We have so much to discuss. Just one really quick question. Do you believe that canonizations of saints are infallible? And if you do believe that, does that mean you think that Saint John Paul II is actually a saint?
I am not going to judge on the matters internal. That's God's judgment. As far as the canonization question, though, I know that the criteria for that have been, let's say, lightened since before. I don't know exactly when it changed, but it's much easier to become a saint in, let's say, the Novus Ordo structure than it was beforehand. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay. We have so much to discuss. I really look forward to having you back. I hope you come back like next week or the week after. Let's not let it go too long or we'll sort of forget what we've been talking about. And you have a lot of slides there. I can see you have a lot of slides, a lot of information to get through. So I hope I didn't interrupt you too much, but when it was important to me, I just wanted to stop you and ask you questions or sort of affirm my position, because I don't want people on my channel thinking I'm SSPX all of a sudden, right?
Right. Yep.
So thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, and I appreciate your friendship, your prayers for me and mine. And I'll be praying for you and yours.
Thank you.
Take care of yourself.
Appreciate it too.
God bless.
Thank you. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.